Hello and welcome back to the interview section of Lesson 8. I have got a super special guest today, Stella Abril. She's the host of the Change Is Now podcast and the president for the Arizona Sustainable Apparel Association. And if it's okay, Stella, I'm going to ask you a few questions about beauty and the environment.
It's absolutely okay. Thank you for having me, Harry.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. All the way from Arizona as well, which is wonderful. I'm going to jump straight in with the questions. What we'd like to know is what inspired you to go eco?
I think I've always leaned towards more natural or organic approaches to, beauty products and fashion, but I never really did too much research. I never went that extra step. So I would allow myself to be sort of greenwashed, right? And so maybe 4 years ago, I decided to begin researching my clothing, my beauty products, kind of everything that I use, and just doing a deep dive. And I was overwhelmed with the amount of chemicals and toxins in our products and clothing and the lack of regulations in place here in the United States. So I decided to use what I had left of all of the toxic stuff and begin replacing one item at a time with something a little more eco-friendly. And so for me, it was the health impacts of what we were putting on our bodies. Because I read, our skin is the largest organ of our body, and so it's really absorbing everything. And I don't think a lot of times we take a moment to sort of think about everything that we are putting on our body: lotions, face creams, hair products, shampoos, conditioners. All of these things are impacting our health. So for me, it was the health impacts.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, I must admit it's a very new thing for me to stop and even think about. You know, you need shampoos, you need um, body gels and stuff like that. And it wasn't until very recently that I kind of stopped and thought, I'm going to actually look what's going into this. I only really thought at first, oh, there's so much plastic, so I'll get a refillable one. But then I thought, hang on, but what's actually going into this? Because yes, it's going on me, which isn't great, but then it's going off me and down the drain and into the water supply. So
Yeah.
that really got me thinking about beauty products. But as I mentioned, I'm no expert, that's for sure. So I'd like to know, my next question is, how can we inspire people to use more eco-friendly hygiene and beauty products?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing, right, is creating awareness. It's huge. Most people rely so heavily on the labels and brands and companies to be transparent when most of them, unfortunately, are just they're not. And so, knowing how your beauty products are regulated where you live, and like I said, here in the U.S., the FDA is sort of limited in what like legal oversight they have in the cosmetic industry. So they sort of self-regulate. Companies self-regulate, and unfortunately, they continue to release these products with harmful chemicals, and there's no real repercussions of doing that. And so, really, we have to be our own advocates for health and everything, and ask questions. Be conscious about what you are choosing to put on your body, what you're choosing to consume overall. And then I tell people to really avoid becoming the expert for someone else. There's a million ways to be a conscious consumer, and no one way is perfect. And so, really allowing people to figure out what works best for them, and being open and willing to guide others as you sort of consume new knowledge and new information. Be willing to share that. I like to like avoid say educate others, because it's almost perceived as overbearing and pushing, right? I don't educate others. It's not your responsibility. It's really your responsibility to share knowledge and gently guide people towards doing better, right? Knowing better and then doing better.
That's absolutely our philosophy here at Renewable English. Um, we do want to help people learn and understand things, but when you do tell somebody what you're doing is bad, it immediately gets their back up. We
Yeah.
talked about it in the food episode as well, that if you tell someone what they're eating is wrong or what they're feeding their children is bad, then it's going to have the reverse effect, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is. I think the number one rule is to have grace, and like I said, let people figure out what works best for them. Any direction, any little progress is still progress. So any direction, towards the right direction is good. So we need to really celebrate, tiny little victories. Like, just for some people it's going to be, I tell people, the win is in your notice, right? It's observing your daily lifestyle and the choices that you make, and really beginning to notice what it is that you're doing. Maybe that's the first step, and maybe we're celebrating that you're actually noticing, hey, these items are really toxic. Um,
Amazing. So the next question, um, what was the first thing that like that you made that you ever used that was sustainable? What was the first step?
so I really went through like a whole toxin elimination phase about 6 years ago. And I began making like my own soaps and my own moisturizers, and I don't know, really taking as much toxins out of my daily regimen, right? And I would say I used Pinterest a lot because they have a lot of really good natural recipes on there. But even still, I don't think I knew, glycerin, for example, it's a more natural product to make soaps. And I don't think at the time I knew the impacts of glycerin. And so now I make soaps without glycerin. So, it's really, I started using like essential oils and finding some like natural and homemade products, um, at farmers markets and stuff like that. Really, it's been like a trial and error for me. I still kind of play with stuff. I've made my own laundry soap. I've made my own dish soap. I think the very first thing that I did was I started, really experimenting with like facial creams and using aloe vera and coconut oil, and seeing what worked best for my skin. That was an easy step for me.
I think one thing that's really great about this, with making products and using natural products, for me as a parent, is it's really fun to do that kind of thing with your kids. I mean, it's something that I hadn't thought of before, but we do all sorts of upcycling projects with plastic bottles and this, that, and the other that we come across. But we haven't really started with this kind of making of soaps and stuff like that. So for me, it's really exciting to get this guidance and these ideas to do with our daughter. So I think that's
Sure.
going to be our next big step, is getting her involved in that, because not only is it a fun thing to do, but we can also kind of guide her and help her in her sort of quest to becoming a more eco-friendly resident of the earth, I guess.
Yeah, I think that helped too, right? Like I have three little girls, so I made a lot of their stuff, made a lot of their food, from scratch, and same with the moisturizers. A lot of the baby lotions that we used had tons of chemicals in them, so I used those same, coconut oils, or essential oils, when they were little. And so yeah, getting them involved is so fun. My kids sort of have this thing. They'll try to look for like a plant as a replacement for stuff. So aloe vera, since we have our own aloe vera plants, we have lots of sunburns here in Arizona. So they run outside to clip their own aloe vera and kind of use that, as their salve for after, swimming. So they jump on board quickly, and they learn so fast. So that's been fun, just to kind of experiment. And they love smushing stuff together. So that's
I
it's fun.
love aloe vera. It's something that my wife and I, we grow it here as well in the south of Spain. It's very hot here, so yeah, in the summer it reaches, well, I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, but it's well over 100. So it reaches sort of, well, last year it reached 46 degrees centigrade. So I'm afraid I can't tell you that in Fahrenheit, but it's well over 100, because 100 is
Yeah.
38. And yeah, so for sunburn and stuff, straight to the aloe vera. I love it. I absolutely love it. Right. So the next one, um, we talked about it very briefly before, but how are traditional beauty and hygiene products bad for the environment? In what ways?
So I know we, like you said, we touched on this earlier, but you have to imagine that all of these toxins that we're putting on our bodies end up somewhere else, right? Down the drain, in our rivers, oceans, soil. So the same impacts that are happening to us, the animal life and the plant life also absorb these toxins, and they are impacted genetically and developmentally just like we are, right? And so the next time you wash cosmetic chemicals, ingredients down the drain, consider those impacts, right, of the toxins and how they impact the environment and the ecosystem. So, I mean, I have some examples of some stuff that it does, which always blows my mind. As far as oceans, there's like a reduction in animal plankton populations. There's a change of behavior and death in, fish and aquatic species. There's different genetic mutations in amphibians. I know everyone's seen the chemical sodium lauryl sulfate, and that alters fish behavior and increases death in fish. Another one is dioxane. It causes death to insects. And so you have to imagine, as you're putting this all on your body and you go out and you touch different things, or you take a shower and you rinse out the shampoo and the conditioner and the body wash and all these fun things, it's being absorbed back into our planet, into our oceans, and the animals, plants. They're also absorbing all of these things, and it really is. They're having terrible reactions to it. And then another thing I would think about is like the plastic packaging. I know you talked about that earlier. This is everywhere in the beauty industry. Everything is packaged with plastic. Absolutely everything. And you get tiny little bottles that oftentimes cannot be refilled. And so those take decades to biodegrade. And so you really have to take a moment and think, one, yes, can I refill this bottle with something different? But what am I refilling it with, right? Is it just as toxic as, the bottle itself? Then you may have to take a step back and reevaluate. And then I know you and I had touched on this, the palm oil issue, right? And so like an equivalent of 300 or some football fields are being cleared to make room for plantations for palm oil. And how many tons of carbon dioxide is released every time they clear out a forest to collect palm oil. And just the impact on climate change and global warming, all of that impacts us holistically. And so, we really have to be super conscious about what it is that how we're impacting, because every time we consume something, it impacts, someone or something outside of it.
Mhm. I read somewhere that somewhere near 70% of products contain palm oil. Um, Now, that in itself isn't fantastic, but I think there are ways of using palm oil. There are some sustainable companies that use palm oil, but there are far too many that are just, as you say, clearing and clearing and clearing forests to plant palms to get palm oil. It isn't only the beauty industry, of course.
Yeah.
So many foods are absolutely jam packed with it because it's so cheap to make. It's something we will look at in future here on Renewable English, but it is that 300 football fields being cleared. It's so much. And what I see here in Spain, if we ever have a big storm, the next day I might see one tree has fallen. I'll think, what a pity, that there's one tree that's fallen. There might have been birds that were living in that tree,
Yeah.
that tree was producing oxygen, and that's one tree. And then you're thinking 300 football fields worth of trees being cleared daily to plant other trees. You're just thinking, how many animal habitats have been destroyed for that? How much oxygen that was being produced will no longer be produced? How many years of growth that went into those trees has just been wiped out? It's just it makes me really sad. But there are people like yourself who are finding ways around it, and there are also more sustainable companies. Now, a bit of a surprise question for you now. Um,
Sure.
can you recommend any companies that are more sustainable, that not necessarily shame the companies that aren't, but are there any that we could look towards that, are slightly more sustainable? Do you have any great tips?
So I do actually. There is this app called the Good Human app. And it literally has everything: beauty, fashion, home goods, everything sustainable. And they've vetted all of these companies prior to promoting them on this app. It really is my go-to app because there's so many different beauty products, so many sustainable, home products, fashion goods in this app, and you can really access it for absolutely anything. There are different types of makeup lines, skincare systems, lots of stuff that have, zero waste, zero waste missions. They have, no palm oil or sustainably grown palms, that type of program in place. All of them are completely sustainable. So I would say find things like that. There's another one. It's the Good Human, and then Good on You. Good on You is another really, really good app to go to. And I would utilize those resources because you're going to find, just like with any skincare system, some work best for you and others don't, right? And so they give you multiple options. So that's really like my go-to. Another thing that you'll find, I don't know if you have heard of, like Etsy has, sustainably made makeups and different things like that. I would say they allow you to kind of have a sample sent to you prior to choosing this line of skincare or makeup. You can play with things, prior to purchasing them. So I don't have right now. I'm in like this exploratory phase. I have ordered some makeup from an Etsy creator, and so far so good. But I don't know. I think I still have not found like my favorite skincare and makeup products yet. I have a number of different things that I'm playing with, but we'll see.
It's a process. It's a
It is.
process. I'm going to ask you one more question now.
Sure.
Um, can you tell me something about your role as the president for Arizona Sustainable Apparel Association?
Sure. So we really work to highlight and showcase our local brands here in Arizona. Arizona is not currently considered a sustainable fashion hub, but we'd like to change that in terms of, circular economy and circular fashion. And so we're really looking at making some legislative changes and pushing some new policies and bills, and also, just providing some knowledge, right? Some free, gently guided knowledge for people to kind of open their minds and begin questioning, where their clothing came from and how they can make better choices. Maybe not perfect choices, but just better choices, small changes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to encourage everybody, listen to the Changes Now podcast. It's a fantastic listen. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure. I feel enlightened even after this short talk. And I'm going to go and reassess certainly my shampooing habits, even though I don't need to do it all that much anymore. So thank you so much for joining us today, Stella.
Thank you for having me, Harry.